Hello and good morning, everyone. Today is April the 20th, 2020. Today I want to talk about the recent article that I saw, which was titled The 14 Critical Podcast Statistics of 2019. So obviously, I have recently a few months ago, started a podcast called Chatter with Steve. And on that venture, I decided that podcasting was gaining more and more popularity. And if I wanted to ever, use that avenue as something, right now it is strictly a hobby that I'd make no money from it, but I have found that it is actually a hobby that I really enjoy getting to interview other people. I enjoy getting to talk, speak, communicate my thoughts over 5, 10, 15 minutes daily is what I'm trying to do. But in that vein, I have become obsessed with the popularity of podcasts over the last few years. Now, if you remember, podcasting actually became, invented more than 10 years ago. I remember hearing about it in maybe 2008, 2009 is when I actually heard about it. And that was kind of, one of those things similar to blogging, that there was a small group of people doing that. However, I think the one thing that divided what we have now and what we had back then was the fact of podcasts were not quite as accessible. You had to get on the internet and you had to go to a certain website. You had to go to the person's page or whatever it might be. And that wasn't near as accessible as going to your phone and having not only being able to access the internet from your phone, which was starting to get more popular at that point in time, but now that we have all of the apps that have different podcasts in one place, I think that is a total differentiator than what we had back then. So over the last several years, now that podcasts have become accessible to the general public, very conveniently, I think that we have a avenue where we can see if podcasting is going to be really popular or not. Now, from its most highest level, we know that audio, video, and writing are the three different ways that people communicate, whether it's news, whether it's advertising, whether it's, marketing in any sense. Video, audio, and written word are the three, groups that we have in there. And I think of podcasting similar to newspaper. When you have newspaper and now people are reading articles a lot online and things like that, that doesn't mean writing is going away. It just means that the way people are consuming it is moving to a different platform. When you look at television or video, when you had the ancient TV programming that you had to tune in at a certain time or whatever it might be. And then you had the invention of the internet. You had the invention of things like Netflix, things like Hulu and whatnot. It's not that video changed. It's that it moved to a different platform that made it way more convenient for people to consume. And now with the audio situation moving from radio into podcasting, it is making it more and more easy to consume. The thing about all three of these different channels of what the internet, what cell phones are doing to these three different channels is that it's moving radio into, or it's moving, starting with written word, it's moving a newspaper that had to be very, very general. So it had to do the top news article about the president or whatever it might be, the top news article about the sports or whatever it might be, the comedy about, a very, very general comedy section or whatever. It moved from being super, super general to blogs about certain things. So housewives could read articles about one certain thing on somebody's blog. A sports person could read about their favorite sports team on a certain blog. The internet has made it to where you can have these tiny, tiny segments and it makes for very, very specific content because people can find it all over the world. You're not having to appeal to one town like a newspaper. You're not having to appeal to one certain thing like a magazine had to do. and appeal to a huge general audience. You're able to get very, very specific because you're able to reach the entire world now with the internet. Same thing with video. You went from a television era that it had to appeal to the mass public in television, and then now with YouTube, now with Netflix, now with Hulu, you're able to watch the one show that you want to watch whenever you want to watch it. It's not that you're having to sit down at a certain time or whatever it might be. You're able to go to the very specific thing you want when you want. Now looking at radio. With podcasting is no different than talk radio. When you go and look at the radio, it was the exact same thing as television, the exact same thing as newspaper. With radio, you have to appeal to the mass public whenever you are listening to the radio. Now, you had to go into a certain sect, so you would go into country radio, or you would go into political news radio, you would go to, hip-hop, or you would listen to a jazz radio, or just talk radio about sports, or whatever it might be. But still, you were just appealing to a demographic in a certain geography. With sports radio, say, you were just talking about things that were relative to Oklahoma City, or you were talking about things that were relative to Dallas, or whatever it might be. And with podcasting, you are able to get so specific and talk about a certain genre of product or a certain genre of news, and you can talk about that one thing, and people can listen to it whenever they want. And I think that they can pause it, they can start it over, they can rewind, they can fast forward, they can do whatever they want. And that is what we see with Netflix and Hulu and all these things, that appeals to people. And it appeals to me too. I do not listen to hardly any radio. All I listen to is podcasts. And so this article was talking about the extreme rise of popularity of podcasts. It says that the Edison Research Group that works for the Podcast Consumer 2019 report has just come out. The 2019 report has just come out. They have done a research starting in 2015 of these same groups of research. So they started in 2015 and started doing research every year, and they talk about the huge growth that podcasting has had since 2015. It says, this year I've pulled out the most 14 interesting statistics about podcast from the Podcast Consumer 2019 report. And here are some of the top 14 most interesting things that this article pulled out. It says 70% of Americans have heard of podcasts. This is up 64% in 2018. And I think if you've been listening to podcasts for the last 2 or 3 years, this blows your mind, but when I went back and looked at the 2016 report, I think it was like 20% of people hadn't even heard of podcasts in 2016. So over the last 4 years, it is incredible the amount of growth of people who have even heard of podcasts. So 70% of Americans know what you're talking about when you refer to a podcast. 51% of Americans 12 or older have listened to a podcast. So half of America not only knows what a podcast is, but has actually listened to one. Here's another key thing that they pulled out from the article or from the research. 32% of Americans listen to podcasts monthly. So you have 1/3 of America listens to a podcast, what you could call on a regular basis. I think that this is a huge indicator of podcasting being around for a long time. In my personal opinion, I think that once apps began to be on phones, whether it be the iTunes podcast app, whether it be Spotify starting to get really heavy into podcasts, whether it be some of the Google things or whatever it is, I think now that podcasts are on cell phones, and when not only that podcasts are on cell phones, but now that you have the ability to so conveniently link your cell phone to your car, that podcasts will take over the talk radio scene as we know it. In my personal opinion, I think now that you have the ability to push 1 or 2 buttons and have a podcast on your car, and of course, this technology will continue to get more and more convenient with your cell phone hooking up to your car, but I think it's only going to get easier for your cell phone to hook up to your car. Car manufacturers are only going to make it more and more convenient for that to happen. So that's not going backwards. So now that phones are easy to link to cars, why would podcasting not become the number one thing that people listen to in their car? Maybe it's podcasting, and maybe it's things like Spotify or Pandora. I was trying to think of the other, Spotify or Pandora or something like that. Maybe you listen to talk, maybe you listen to music, whatever it might be. But I think that people are going to start consuming the information on their phones. And I think that that is going to make podcasting completely explode over the next few years. Now that cars are starting to get more and more popular in having the ability to link your phone to your car so conveniently. The article goes on to pull out a lot more interesting facts. One of the interesting facts that men are more devoted podcast listeners. Says 36% of males listen to podcasts monthly versus 29% of females. So males listen to podcasts a lot more than females, which is very interesting. Here was a key indicator I thought of a growing thing. So new technology typically starts with a younger person, right? So you look at anything social media, you look at anything with fashion or new things, typically start with a younger person. So high school, college, whatever it might be, and then it ages up. So you look at Facebook. Facebook started with high school, college kids. Twitter started with the younger generation, and then it ages up. You look at Instagram, the same thing, high school, college age, and then it ages up. More and more people, your mom, your parents get onto it, and then your grandparents get onto it. 40% of Americans 54 or younger listen to podcasts monthly. So 40% of Americans, 54% or younger. I think that this is a key indicator that this is going to continue to age up as older people are able to have podcasts on their phone, and they're able to, it's kind of like text messages. You used to couldn't send a text message to, somebody that was like your parent or whatever. They didn't, don't bother me with that text message stuff. But now a text message, even to a grandparent, is nothing that is out of the ordinary. I think that this is a key indicator that 40% of Americans 54 or younger, I think that this 40% will eventually grow into the entire population. So maybe 40% of podcasts of people in America will listen monthly eventually, 40%. That is. It goes on to say, the last part of the article went on to say how often people that consume podcasts listen to podcasts. For me, this is so true. I don't listen to anything in my car. It's kind of like Zig Ziglar says that your car time, your drive time is an opportunity to have automobile university, that this is a chance that you can get up to the equivalent of a college degree in whatever you want to listen to. So whether it's entertainment, whether it's around a certain subject. I listen to a lot of business podcasts and things like that while I'm driving. And I think that this is a very key indicator as well, that the people that listen to podcasts are somewhat obsessed with them, so to speak. You kind of makes you think of the Netflix things, the Hulu things, that these people that watch Netflix, these people that watch Hulu are obsessed with these certain things. It's because it's not as generic as television. It's not as generic as radio. You can be so much more detailed. You can be so much more into a niche that you don't have to have this general wide, hey, good morning, America. It can be, good morning, the people that enjoy this business podcast who are under the age of 46, who live in America, that have it can be so much more detailed and so much more segmented into tiny little segments. The people that listen to podcasts are listening to exactly what they want to listen to. The advertisements that they're getting are advertisements towards that person. When you listen to a talk radio podcast or whatever it might be, you're getting advertisements that are catered exactly to somebody like you. So that's pretty much the end of the article. It went on to say that 93% of podcast fans listen to most of an episode. I thought that blew my mind. 93% of people finish an episode or listen to the majority of the episode. And then it went on to say, this is a key for advertisers as well in marketing. 52% of people that hear an advertisement on a podcast consider that thing. When you talk about the power that has as far as a marketing capability, I think this goes back into the segmentation. When you are when you're advertising on a business podcast, you know that the people listening to that podcast are either in business or they are interested in business. And so that helps as an advertiser to know what you want to say. That helps as an advertiser to know what you want. If you want to be on that podcast, does my product appeal to those people in business? And I think that is why half of the people that hear advertisements on podcasts consider that product. It's because these things are so segmented. These things are in such a small category that it has no choice but to appeal to those type of people. So I've continued to ramble on for quite a long time, way longer than I planned, but I think that everything is moving into more and more segmented things, and I think that it is awesome. It's awesome that we are able to we are able to watch exactly what we want to watch. We don't have to sit down and hope that from the hours of 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. that we'll see something on TV that we want to see. We can sit down and know exactly what we want to watch, whether it's a show, whether it's a documentary, whatever it might be. We're able to see exactly what we want to see. That's powerful for the people consuming it. That's also powerful for advertisers that are advertising on these platforms because they know exactly what these people's demographics, they know what their thought process is, they know exactly what they're interested in, and it is powerful for everyone. If you don't listen to podcasts, shame on you. 70% of Americans have heard of it. 50% of Americans have listened to one. So if you're not in that category, you might look into podcasts. I bet you will find something that you want to listen to. One thing you might want to listen to is Chatter with Steve. Shameless plug there. Thank you for listening to my rant.